The river had swollen overnight, fed by unrelenting rain that turned its usual gentle current into a gray, churning torrent. Branches and leaves floated on the surface, carried downstream in a chaotic dance, and the air smelled of wet earth and moss. He had come to check the banks, hoping to see nothing more than the usual wildlife tracks or the occasional bird dipping into the water. Then he saw it, a dark, hulking shape clinging desperately to the surface. At first, he thought it might be a deer, but the meneur gave it away. A lion. Its powerful body thrashed against the current, limbs stretching and pulling, yet the water pulled harder, dragging him backward. A low, tremulous moan escaped the lion's throat, almost drowned by the roar of the river. The sound struck the man with a sudden urgency, a raw reminder of the thin line between life and death. He ran to the edge, mud clinging to his boots, heart hammering in rhythm with the wild water. Hold on, he whispered, a quiet plea that seemed almost foolish against the relentless force of the river. But the lion's head bobbed back into view, eyes wide, wet, and filled with panic. Then a wave swept over him, and for a long moment, he disappeared beneath the surface. Without hesitation, the man dove in. The water hit his chest with a shock of cold, sharp and biting, but he pushed forward, muscles straining, lungs burning. Each stroke toward the lion was a battle against both the current and the fear creeping into his mind. His hands finally found the meneur, soaked and heavy with river water, and he clung to it, feeling the tremor of life beneath his grip. The lion struggled, but not aggressively. It was raw, instinctive survival. A low growl vibrated from deep in his chest, not a sound of anger, but a warning, a communication that this was no easy task. Inch by inch, the man fought the river, dragging the lion's massive body toward the shallower water near the bank. Every movement was a negotiation of strength and patience. The river seemed endless, relentless, yet step by step, they made progress. Finally, the lion's paws hit the muddy bank, and he collapsed, chest heaving, water dripping from fur and whiskers. The man lay beside him, wet and trembling, listening to the rhythm of the river behind them. Neither spoke, neither moved. The air was thick with the smell of wet fur and damp earth, a quiet tension settling around them like a fragile cocoon. The lion lifted his head just enough to glance at the man. His eyes, wide and still wary, held a flicker of recognition, or perhaps a question. Why had this human come into his danger? The man stroked the lion's wet meneur lightly, careful not to startle him. "It's okay," he whispered. "You're safe now." For a long while, they remained side by side, two lives intertwined by a sudden, violent river and the choice to act without hesitation. Around them, the forest seemed to pause. Birds hesitated on branches, the wind softened, and even the river's roar felt distant. In that quiet, fragile space, survival and compassion met, and a bond began to form, not yet trust, but the first glimmer of connection. By the time the sun broke through the clouds, scattering golden light over the muddy bank, the lion had settled slightly, panting, exhausted, yet alive. The man rose, soaked and shivering, and gave a small nod. The first step had been taken. He knew this was only the beginning. The morning after the river ordeal, the lion lay on the muddy bank, his massive frame still trembling. Water had soaked him through, and the chill from the night rains clung to his fur. Every breath seemed measured, shallow, as if conserving strength for a fight that might never come. He lifted his head occasionally, scanning the forest with alert, wary eyes, the instincts of a predator still sharp despite exhaustion. The man sat a few meters away, careful not to crowd him. He tore a strip from his damp shirt and gently wiped the mud from the lion's eyes, working slowly, deliberately, as if each motion were a quiet question. "Will you allow this?" The lion flinched at first, ears flattening slightly, but the movement was small, almost imperceptible. Eventually, he relaxed just enough to let the human's hands linger. Around them, the forest was alive in subtle ways. Birds called softly from high branches, their songs tentative, as if unsure of this unusual scene below. Water dripped from the leaves, plopping into puddles on the muddy ground. The scent of wet earth mixed with the lion's musky fur, a raw and tangible reminder of survival, struggle, and the life that persisted despite danger. The man offered a small piece of dry bread, placing it a few meters away. The lion's ears twitched, then he approached cautiously, sniffing the food before nibbling with precise, careful bites. Each motion was cautious, deliberate, a negotiation of trust that stretched across the space between man and beast. He paused often, eyes flicking toward the man, watching for movement, for threat. There was fear, but also curiosity, a fragile thread forming between predator and human. The man spoke sparingly, his voice soft, calm, almost swallowed by the sounds of the forest. "Almost safe," he whispered. No grand statements, no commands, just a quiet acknowledgement that they were both here, breathing, surviving. The lion responded with a low, tremulous moan, not loud enough to carry far, but clear in the stillness around them. It was a sound that spoke of relief, but also lingering anxiety, the memory of the river's pull still fresh in muscle and bone. Minutes stretched into hours. The man observed carefully, noting each subtle shift. A paw stretched forward, a tail flicked, a head lifted higher than before. The lion's movements were still cautious, but deliberate. In every small acceptance, of touch, of food, of presence, there was progress. Not complete trust, but the first steps toward it, quiet and patient. The wind shifted, brushing against wet fur and human skin alike, carrying the scent of distant wildflowers. A heron called faintly from the river's edge, its cry sharp against the background of the rushing water still audible downstream. The lion's ears twitched again, alert, yet he remained in place, shoulders sagging with exhaustion but body relaxed enough to hint at the possibility of safety. By afternoon, the forest seemed to breathe along with them, the tension easing ever so slightly. The lion's eyes, once wide with fear, now softened, flickering occasionally with cautious curiosity. The man rose slowly, never turning his back, never forcing movement. He offered a hand, flat, palm down, for the lion to approach if he chose. The lion did not touch it, yet he did not retreat. He simply observed, the silence between them now carrying a strange comfort. For the first time since the river, there was no immediate threat, no struggle for life, only presence, shared between two very different beings, bound momentarily by survival and quiet trust. It was fragile, incomplete, but in this slow, gentle coexistence, something began to grow, the first glimmer of connection, fragile yet undeniable. The morning light broke softly through the forest canopy, illuminating the lion's wet, matted fur and the mud streaks that ran along his flanks. He lay half-turned on the riverbank, muscles tense beneath his soaked coat, eyes scanning every movement, every shadow. Even in exhaustion, he remained alert, instinctive awareness unbroken. His low growls, quiet and sporadic, punctuated the gentle rustle of leaves, a subtle reminder that survival was still a negotiation. The man approached slowly, careful to keep his movements deliberate and non-threatening. He knelt a few feet away, observing the lion's body. There were scratches along the forelegs, subtle bruises that revealed themselves only when the sunlight caught the wet fur just so. The mane, usually thick and proud, hung heavy and uneven, tangled with mud and debris. He noted the shallow breathing, the subtle tremor in the limbs, a map of pain written across muscle and bone. For a long while, he said nothing, letting the lion settle in his own rhythm, every careful inch a quiet conversation. The animal's eyes flicked toward him occasionally, alert, wary, measuring intention, gauging patience. The man's hands hovered near the lion's side, ready to help, yet restrained, understanding that forced contact could undo the fragile trust they had begun to build. Around them, the forest carried the weight of the morning rain. Drops fell from leaves to the soft earth below, and the scent of wet soil mixed with the sharp tang of the lion's fur. A distant heron called once, its cry echoing through the trees, and the lion's ears twitched, pivoting instinctively. The tension between alertness and exhaustion played across his body, every small movement a testament to resilience. The man tore a larger strip of cloth from his damp shirt and placed it gently near the lion, offering warmth without intrusion. Slowly, the lion inched toward it, brushing against the fabric with tentative curiosity, sniffing before retreating slightly. Each small action was a negotiation, a silent acknowledgement of both need and boundaries. He retrieved some food from his pack, dried meat and bread, and laid it a careful distance away. The lion approached in measured steps, tasting cautiously, ears flicking at the slightest sound. He ate sparingly, pausing often, watching, listening. Each bite was careful, deliberate, a balance between hunger and caution, the body's instinctive memory of threat tempered by the quiet presence of the man. Hours passed with subtle shifts. The lion's posture gradually softened, shoulders sagged, eyes blinked slower, the tremor in his paws diminished. The man spoke in low, calm murmurs only when necessary, a gentle stream of reassurance rather than instruction. "It's okay," he said, voice barely more than a breath, as the lion rested his head momentarily on the soft ground. By late afternoon, the initial shock of the river's violence had begun to fade, replaced by lingering soreness and exhaustion. The man observed the lion's chest rise and fall steadily, his gaze moving along the lines of bruised muscle, scratches, and waterlogged fur. Each detail told a story of struggle, of survival, of pain endured. Yet despite the physical toll, there was resilience, a quiet strength that demanded respect rather than pity. The forest seemed to acknowledge this pause between life and injury. The wind softened, brushing the leaves with a gentle rhythm, the river's roar reduced to a distant hum. In that fragile stillness, the man and the lion existed side by side, one learning patience, the other extending trust. Though not yet complete, a bond had formed in the quiet understanding of shared struggle, echoing softly in the lion's measured breaths and the man's unwavering presence. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the forest canopy, scattering gold across the damp earth. The air smelled of wet leaves, moss, and the faint tang of river water. The lion rested on the muddy bank, his massive body still trembling slightly from exhaustion. He lifted his head slowly, muscles stiff, ears flicking at every distant sound, the rustle of leaves, the call of a distant bird, the whisper of wind through the trees. The man stayed low, close enough to offer comfort but careful to respect the lion's space. He had been there for hours, providing warmth, food, and quiet reassurance, always mindful of the delicate line between help and intrusion. Each gesture had been deliberate, patient, never rushed, never forced. The lion's cautious acceptance of these small acts had built a fragile bond, one that hovered on the edge of instinct and trust. The lion shifted, placing his weight unevenly on his legs, testing movement after the ordeal of the river. He sniffed the air, eyes scanning the surroundings, then turned his gaze toward the man. There was a pause, a measured stillness, and then, a slow, almost imperceptible motion. The lion extended a massive paw and gently rested it on the man's arm. The weight was solid but careful, the gesture deliberate, almost ceremonial. It was not dominance, nor playfulness, it was acknowledgement, recognition, a quiet gift of trust. The man's breath caught, a quiet exhale escaping his lips. "It's okay," he whispered, letting his voice drift with the wind. Tears stung his eyes, mingling with rainwater still clinging to his hair. The gesture was fleeting, but its significance was immense. In that simple contact, the lion had communicated something words could not capture, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and recognition that their shared struggle had not been in vain. The forest seemed to hold its breath in that moment. Leaves hung suspended on branches, the distant river sounded softer, and the birds quieted their calls, as if the entire world had paused to honor the subtle exchange between man and lion. The sunlight caught the shimmer of water on the lion's fur, highlighting each droplet as if the forest itself were paying attention to this fragile connection. The lion pulled his paw back and settled once more on the bank, shoulders easing, breathing slower and deeper. The tremor in his muscles diminished, replaced by a tentative calm. He began to lick the mud from his fur, grooming himself with methodical care, a quiet sign of recovery and self-soothing. The man sat back slightly, letting him take the lead, giving him the space he needed to regain strength and dignity. Moments stretched into hours, a soft rhythm settling over them. The man's presence remained constant but unobtrusive. He offered small pieces of food now and then, encouraged gentle movement, and allowed the lion to set the pace. The bond between them had shifted subtly, it was no longer just survival, but a recognition of mutual respect. Each glance, each breath, carried meaning, a language formed without words. As the sun began to lower, painting the forest with golden and amber hues, the lion stood fully. Muscles rippled beneath wet fur, and he tested each step with careful precision. Then, without a backward glance, he moved toward the denser forest, paws sinking into the soft, wet earth. The man remained where he was, watching, heart full, understanding that the gesture, the paw, the trust, the quiet acknowledgement, would remain with him long after the lion disappeared into the shadows. In the fading light, the forest exhaled. The river murmured behind them. And in that quiet, fleeting moment, both human and lion carried with them the memory of connection forged through patience, respect, and a fragile, mutual grace. By early evening, the forest had grown quieter, the rain from the previous days replaced by a still, damp calm. The lion stirred, muscles rippling beneath wet fur, testing each step with careful precision. His movements were deliberate, slow, as if reacquainting himself with the earth beneath his paws. The man remained several meters away, giving the lion the space he needed, understanding that the final act of trust required freedom. The lion paused at the edge of the riverbank, ears flicking toward distant sounds, a heron taking flight, a rustle in the underbrush, the soft gurgle of the river flowing behind them. He looked back, amber eyes meeting the man's gaze. There was no expectation, no request for continued presence, only a quiet acknowledgement, a fleeting connection that both had recognized and respected. Then, with a final, careful step, he moved into the forest, his large paws pressing into the wet soil, leaves brushing against his sides. The man exhaled softly, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. He had witnessed something rare and fragile, a life saved, trust earned, and gratitude expressed in the simplest, most honest of gestures. Though the lion disappeared from sight, the memory of the paw, the low moan, the tremor of his exhausted body lingered, etched in the man's mind as if burned by the experience of true connection. The forest seemed to return to its usual rhythm, leaves rustling gently in the evening breeze, birds calling softly in the distance. The river murmured as it wound through the trees, carrying the faint scent of wet earth and moss. Yet the air held a quiet reverence, a lingering echo of what had transpired on the muddy bank. Life, fragile and powerful, had intertwined in a fleeting but unforgettable way. The man walked along the riverbank, wet clothes clinging to him, mud caked on his boots. He paused occasionally, glancing at the shadows where the lion had vanished, and whispered into the quiet, "Be safe." His voice barely rose above the forest's ambient sounds, yet it carried with it a gentle gratitude, a recognition that this encounter had changed him in ways words could never fully capture. As the light shifted to gold and then soft violet hues, he noted how the forest transformed in the fading sun. Each leaf shimmered with residual droplets of water, the river reflected the sky in streaks of pink and orange, the air was thick with the scent of wet earth and growing night. The world had continued, yet the memory of survival, trust, and fragile connection remained, suspended in the quiet between one heartbeat and the next. In that silence, the man understood the rare, unspoken truths of human and animal interaction. Not every life could be saved, not every connection could be maintained, but sometimes, just sometimes, patience, compassion, and courage could bridge the gap. And when that bridge formed, even briefly, it left an imprint on the soul, a quiet knowledge that two very different beings had met and honored each other's existence. The forest deepened into shadow, and the man turned back toward the path he had come. He carried with him more than wet clothes and mud. He carried the memory of trust extended and received, of life teetering on the edge and reclaimed, and of a paw resting gently on his arm, a gesture that would remain with him forever. The lion's retreat into the wild was not an ending, but a continuation, a testament to the quiet grace of survival and the subtle poetry that exists when human and animal coexist with respect.